Great. Hello, Cleantechers. I'm Mike Casey, and I'm the founder of TigerCom, the National Clean Economy Marcom and Public Affairs firm. I've got the honor today of convening the latest Cleantech Editors Roundtable. The series has grown increasingly popular. I think that's in part because the editors have a breadth of view that few of us working in particular companies can match. And I also think these sectors are growing so rapidly that more people working in them realize the editors that are here with us, the reporting and the curating that they do, we've really come to rely on them. So I'm just going to take this moment to extend our collective thanks to all of you for the work that you do. And I'm going to go ahead and have the panelists introduce themselves in alphabetical order and then go right to a few questions. Heather, can I start with you?
Hello, Heather Clancy with GreenBiz.
All right. And I think next, Yulia.
I'm Yulia Georgiou with Utility Dive.
All right.
I am Kelly Pickerel. I am editor-in-chief at Solar Power World magazine and website.
Zach.
Zachary Shahan, editor and CEO of Cleantech.
Darius.
Arya Sneakers, editor-in-chief at Recharge.
And last but not least, our new face, Mr. Wagman with PV Magazine. Welcome.
I'm Peter Wagman. I'm the senior U.S. editor for PV Magazine.
Great.
Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. All right. Well, we already have a set of questions that people want me to ask you. I'm going to go through a few that we've come up with first, which is, since we last spoke, a lot has happened. I'd like to ask each of you the three biggest clean tech trends you see emerging from the summer that you think are sure to extend into the fall. And Heather, I know I default always asking you to go first in the first question, but you always have such good answers. So if I can, I'm going to ask you again.
Okay. I got three things. You asked for three. I'll give you three. One, in no particular order, I would say technology to help verify claims. So carbon accounting software. We see more ESG accounting software, platforms that are coming in place, to artificial intelligence to check those claims and so forth. And that applies for both the companies making the claims, like the big corporates, as well as the technology companies that are looking for funding. Increasingly, VCs are asking those startups to prove that their carbon thing does indeed take out as the carbon that they're claiming it does. That's number one. Number two is, I think there's an increased focus on electronic waste and how do you deal with it, which is perpetuating and causing a lot of interest in recycling schemes, particularly batteries for EVs. Other things, though, as well, we see a lot of other, quote, mining, end quote, initiatives to take the materials out of electronics or older equipment and get it back into circulation. And then the third thing I will just throw out there is not really a technology, but a trend, but just sort of a thing related to all the clean tech and climate tech that we see, which is focus on manufacturing in the United States. And huge Ford announcement this week is a great example of that. Also Lucid, I think, announced a factory just last night as well. But electric vehicles are going to be manufactured in the US, and you're going to hear those companies talking about that more. I know they're going to be manufactured elsewhere, but it's important for America to hear that story.
Got it. Yulia, let me go to you next.
Sure. So Utility Dive doesn't really focuses on clean tech tangentially, but I was going to say that our sister publication Waste Dive has been writing a lot about energy waste and e-waste. So that did make me think about a couple of their recent features, Heather. And Utility Dive, we have just officially made electrification, building and transportation electrification, a big net on our website. So we have been tracking about how that's growing more and more prominently. And there's been, over the summer and a little bit ahead of that, there's been a lot of news on that, especially in California, where they're looking at pushing investor-owned utilities to take the leap on incentivizing building electrification. And as far as technology, I was going to say more and more focusing on if you're often playing into the grid, we always ask about cybersecurity concerns, and oftentimes, as a reporter, you might get an answer of, "Oh, well, we're very secure on that. We definitely know what we're doing," but no one really goes into the meat on how safe things are, and that certainly no longer flies. More and more ransomware attacks, more other attacks on the grid that we've seen this summer accelerate, and that definitely impacts clean tech as well. And I guess for my third one, I was going to say there's a lot of different business practices from Europe coming into the US as we're building offshore wind supply chains. Which
Okay.
I could go into more, but I don't know how much you want to hear about that.
Up to you. David, I know you're the you're you're new to this, but we'd like to have you go next and give us your three.
Sure. Yep. Three, and there's some caveats attached to these, I think. The first one is the ongoing and increasing deployment of energy storage alongside solar. It's proving, at least in the U.S. and North America, that storage is a valuable component and a way to make solar at least available into the evening, and also provide various kinds of ancillary services. And there seems to be just an increasing amount of storage that is being developed and being deployed. You know, one caveat is that there's a lot of lithium ion storage that's being put out on the grid. There are some issues related to the potential for what's known as thermal runaway with lithium ion. We've seen it in personal electronics. We've seen it in the aviation industry with a problem a few years ago with batteries on Boeing 787. And we're seeing it to an extent at utility scale. There was a particular accident a couple of years ago at an Arizona facility that was using lithium-ion batteries that ended up in a fire and an explosion. And then within the last couple of weeks, what had been explained as being one of the largest battery storage systems in the world out at Moss Landing went offline. And I believe, as far as I checked this morning, and as far as I know, it's still offline due to an overheating issue. And that is a bit of a concern, at least given the extent to which lithium ion is being used at utility scale. A second ongoing trend is what seems to be greater policy certainty. And there's a big caveat with that as well. That seems, as Heather pointed out, I think at the top, is leading to some investment decisions to bring more manufacturing back into the US. There have been a number of module manufacturers who said that they're going to expand. First Solar announced a major expansion in their campus in Northwestern Ohio. All of that kind of depends on the ongoing certainty at the federal level, and we'll see what happens over the next several days and maybe even hours in terms of what happens with the infrastructure bill and the Biden administration's ability to get that across the finish line, whether that kind of certainty remains intact. And then you know, I'll throw into the mix the kind of the growing doubt and uncertainty around the ability of the overall grid to handle major disruptions, climate type of disruptions with hurricanes, the whole fire threat out in the West, the problems that have taken place in Texas in February, and the extent to which the broad grid is able to continue to function adequately. And what seems to be taking place is an increasing move towards microgrids, towards deployment of more storage, towards more localized kinds of generation. And I would expect that to continue. But that's a fundamental shift in really in how the grid functions and is designed to operate. So those are the three.
You're muted.
Mike,
Mike, you're muted.
Thank you. Sorry, not a good move for a host. We're going to go to you, Darius, to get some wind here in the mix. But I do think David deserves credit for not going trade, because he could have easily done that and he gave a more nuanced answer. So that's good. Darius, you're 3.
Well, I'll start with hydrogen, although, I'll quickly move on to wind. So hydrogen everywhere, right? I think in many ways, what we've seen in the last 3 months is just an acceleration of the various trends within that sector. The blue versus green debate bubbles on, I think, and long it will. I mean, as long as oil and gas is staunchly behind using blue to get to green rather than just leapfrogging straight to renewable powered hydrogen, that will continue to be a major talking point. Ignacio Galan, CEO of Iberdrola today, said that without urgent financial support within the EU, that is, a European green hydrogen boom will not happen. So that's the kind of sting in the tail for all those who believe we need to just again leap straight to green. The IEA, of course, put up their roadmap for China today, getting through to carbon neutrality well ahead of the 2060 target. Counts on huge volumes of hydrogen. Of course, China is already the international market leader, but most of what they do is gray hydrogen. And that is to say, fossil fuels based without any carbon capture. So how quickly they can move through the gears to get from gray to blue to green is going to be fundamental, not just to their energy transition, but indeed to the world's chances of meeting the Paris targets. Again, you could go on. I think we, Recharge 12 weeks, 8 weeks ago, we launched a hydrogen newsletter, and it's seeing thousands of subscribers already. This is obviously, there's no end to the appetite for it, and indeed, there's like most hot topics, there's a lot of carpetbagging. I mean, you have to be you have to sort of know your proverbials from your elbow to write on the subject currently, because everyone's writing about hydrogen. I'll just segue into offshore wind, because as we've been chanting at Recharge since we've been around, really, we do believe offshore wind will be an engine of the energy transition, and I think so it's proving. If you look at what's happening in Europe and the scaling up of targets around the northern seas, if you look at what's happening in Asia, China, but also ex-China, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, it's all points very clearly to kind of this unprecedented industrial growth. We reported, just to click hydrogen together with wind, which we obviously talk a lot about in the space. There's a plan for a 10 gigawatt green hydrogen project in Mauritania that would include Africa's first offshore wind farm. So you get a sense that that obviously offshore wind and hydrogen is one of those. It's a power couple of sorts. And I would just obviously sort of spin out from offshore wind to say floating wind is what we're seeing is. Again, we've been great believers at Recharge since 2009 in floating wind, with the first demos installed. But to see what's happened in that space, having gone from one utility scale demo, a pilot project in 2009, to being on the brink of, well, it depends whose numbers you want to believe, but obviously tens of gigs in the next before the end of 2030. Anyways, that's pretty plain. And I think floating winds becoming increasingly seen as a bit of a Swiss Army knife too, insofar as you can pure play electricity, of course, from the heaviest, steadiest winds far offshore. You can use it for as a baseload power supply for hydrogen. There's a lot of discussion about how quickly the cost of hydrogen can be brought down with floating wind, and increasingly we've seen this a lot in recent weeks. But it's something that's been discussed going back to about 2014. Can use floating wind to decarbonize late life offshore oil and gas operations. So get the diesel gens off, get the gas fired generator sets off, run these things with some part floating wind. You're seeing it Hywind Tampa and Ecuador's big project off Norway, but you're seeing a lot of other more sort of innovative sort of solutions involving floating wind and decarbonization of offshore oil and gas operations. Scotland's going to weave this into their big ScotWind 10 gigawatt ScotWind license tender coming up. So those probably in some ways aren't new, but they're certainly rapidly developing trends from the way from where we see it.
All right, let's do Zach and then Kelly with the last word on the big 3 trends.
Thanks. I'm happy Darius took the hydrogen topic, because I was trying to squeeze that in, and I think he covered it very well. I'm sure we'll come back to it. Well, I'll repeat one that I've used before, but the growing EV market share in certain regions, not exactly the US yet, but in Europe, it's at 20% of new cars sold are plug-in vehicles. In China, it's 10%. And the second half of the year is expected to be by far the bigger half of the year. The second half, the last quarter, is always the biggest for the EV sales market. So we're going to see those numbers even rise. And that's a really stunning growth from just 2 years ago. It's 10% is sort of seen as a kind of a disruptive point where disruption starts to really occur, and we're already at 20% in Europe. And I think that is influencing the story in the US as well. The announcements like we're getting from Ford, others, where it's clear this is the future, and the more you try to slow walk it, the worse you're going to be. So we see very serious movement from Ford, perhaps from GM a bit again, and part of that discussion that I think is really starting to pick up is it's not just EV sales, it's the decline of gas and diesel vehicle sales. And so EV market share has risen a lot in those markets, partly because EV sales have risen a lot, and partly because gas diesel vehicle sales have dropped a lot. And there's a lot of expectation that we're starting to see a kind of Osborne effect, kind of basically that the next decade is going to see, supply can't match demand for EV demand in the coming decade, but people will stop buying new gas and diesel cars when they realize they want their next car to be electric. So we think we're already seeing that in Europe, and that it's going to become a bigger story. So that's one. Two, someone already mentioned battery supply chain. So EV supply chain, EV production in the US, but not only. This has long been a sort of important topic in the industry, but I've recently seen the CEO of Ford, Jim Farley, bring this up, the importance of having a supply chain in the US for EVs. So, they obviously have a battery pack production facility going on, but it's not just about battery packs, not just about battery cells, it's about the minerals that go into these batteries, and also the processing plants. So we have a even more warped situation than OPEC right now, with China sort of controlling battery mineral processing, and this is a really big issue in the industry, and it's very hard to see how it gets resolved. But I think it's going to be a very big part of the discussion in the rest of the year, for the industry and for policymakers. And sticking with my sort of what we focus on a lot, which is what I love about this roundtable, is you have different people with different focus areas. I think self-driving tech is going to be a big story. There are already robotaxi companies in China, in Chinese cities, that are operating robotaxis. You have Waymo in the Southwest a little bit, but now in San Francisco. And there's word that Waymo is sort of making movements in France and I think Japan, sort of for more kind of test programs. And then of course you have Tesla. It's got the full self-driving beta rollout sort of beginning. I have a 2-year-old Model 3, and I expected it to happen about 2 years ago. And the past year, it's been about 2 weeks away, for about 11 months, according to Elon Musk. But we're actually really rolling into it now, and this is a really exciting week for that. And the last quarter of the year is going to be really fascinating. A lot of difficulties and pros on that topic. And then there's other companies, Cruise, Aurora, that are making movement, and we might see some interesting news in the rest of the year from some of these other companies as well. It's a bit of a mystery always in this industry, but I think we're going to have some pretty big headlines coming up before 2022.
I must say I'm reassured that all is well with the universe. You didn't leave Elon Musk out of this answer, Zach. So you've been consistent across all 6 roundtables. But
yeah,
if Ford overtakes Tesla, what are you going to do? I think you're going to have to make an editorial judgment there. But
well, they've both tweeted our content multiple times. We've been in communication with both of them many times. So appreciate what both are doing right now. They're very important roles, very different roles, and very important roles both of them are playing. So.
All right, David, you have to be on at least 3 of these before I tease you during the webinar. So you're good. Kelly, last word. Big 3 trends. We're getting some great questions here from the audience here. So I want to get to those after this one.
Sure. Yeah. So Solar Power World, in the name, we obviously focus on solar and energy storage across the United States. So a lot of my answers are kind of going to overlap with what David was talking about, but I do want to talk a little bit about policy. It does seem to be huge right now in the solar industry. And I've been reporting on solar in the United States for 10 years now. I'm used to that solar coaster that we always talk about, up and down, but it seems like right now is especially intense. There's a lot of kind of ignorant legislation out there related to the solar industry. Like on a state level, we're looking at out in California, they recently passed that only C10 electrical contractors can install solar and storage in the state. And a very small percentage, something like 22% of the solar installers in California actually have that licensing. And you have to, to get that license, you have to do 4 years of work and you have to take an exam. And California is the country's largest solar market. And so if we're preventing these companies from actually installing solar in the state, I mean, it's going to affect a lot of jobs. So we're looking at that. We're following along with that. Then, of course, the national policy, we're battling multiple tariffs on solar panels from all areas, but there are some tax credits being floated, for solar panel manufacturers that maybe we can actually get some domestic manufacturing going. Obviously, that's going to take time. It's not something that you can start overnight, just start up a solar panel factory. But it's just like climate change. You're not going to fix climate change overnight. It's going to take time. So I think it's really important to kind of get these things started now. So this is kind of a pivotal moment, I think, for the U.S. solar industry right now.
So that segues into our first audience question. I got a little ahead of time. This is Peter Kelly with runs Renewcom, kind of a allied friendly firm of ours. He asks, is California really going to throw away the market for residential and commercial solar with a 2/3 cut in what utilities have to pay for it so that only utilities can afford to go solar? Reactions from Kelly, you want to start off? Anybody else want to jump in on to answer that question?
Yeah, maybe Yulia might have a little more insight on that by the utility side, but I just don't, that's where I keep saying like this ignorant legislation. I just don't understand why, like, California is the biggest solar market, why we are threatening jobs and trying to transform things, but I wouldn't put it past utilities to be kind of looking into these avenues.
Yeah, I was going to say, I thought about talking about those solar topics as well, but I knew some solar people would have my back. So I knew I had to fill my kind of corner of the discussion, but I really appreciate that. And just building onto that question, I'm curious, Kelly, where is it clear where this legislation is coming from? Like who's getting it in front of legislators and what legislators are running with this kind of thing? I mean, there's a variety of topics there, but the E4 certification and just also the push to basically change net metering in California.
Yeah, that definitely seems to be coming like from the PUC and all of the solar installer organizations, the storage associations. I mean, they are fighting against it. So it's definitely not something that's coming from within our areas. It seems to be a utility situation.
But on the legislator slide, like who's welcoming this kind of topic?
I think it's easy to sell this topic if you're trying to say, oh, we need to build a holistic grid and we need people that are in charge of, that are used to making decisions that will protect our grid, that have resiliency in mind. I think it's easy to sell it to people that don't understand how complex the grid is. After all the resilience and the ongoing resiliency dockets, that's top of mind in California for legislators. If they're thinking about the grid, they're not thinking about, oh, we're going to stifle competition when we already have the largest market. But I was going to say, for what Kelly was hinting of, oh, it's starting from the PUC level. California is a very fascinating place to watch right now, and there's a lot of upheaval. The president is just announced she's stepping down. She hasn't been in charge that long. It's supposed to not impact other dockets that they have going on, but there's a lot of open question marks on what's going on there. So I don't know about, oh, who is listening to this stuff. I think it's more like it's hard. It hasn't been very effective to frame that distributed solar and distributed resources can be a big contributor to resiliency and safety. I think the one group that I know has a lot of money for lobbying that has been doing this more better is Sunrun. they often talk about microgrids and microgrid as a solution, and what they're doing in Puerto Rico, how well it would work in Northern California areas, stuff like that. That's what I would pull out as far as how this discussion is ending up more anti distributed solar. But please
And
fill in.
I think there's also been, they've been very good at framing it around an equity issue. And I think they've really learned in the past several years how to frame things to go after basically the left more than the, you know, they sort of had the right already. Maybe David has some more insight on any of this as well. I mean, or anyone, I mean, if there anyone who's been following it, I'm just curious to hear more takes on it.
Yeah. You know, I was just going to make the point that California isn't alone in some of the apparent anti-solar movement. You know, Illinois just went through a horrific bit of legislative work to try to pull the solar industry back together. There have been other states that likewise have been toying with various kind of anti-solar moves. You know, Ohio has not been particularly progressive this legislative session, and I'm wondering, you know, more broadly, you ask, you know, who's behind it? Is there some sort of coordination? Is there a broader sort of national anti-solar, anti-distributed generation kind of move? You know, there's some solar advocates will say, well, you know, it's the Edison Electric Institute, the kind of the you know, the lobbying group for the investor-owned utilities has done various kinds of training around how to oppose solar and renewable energy, and you know, it's just interesting to see this pushback at the legislative level. I don't have a clear answer on who's doing it, but
Zach, I'll make a point and then we go to a different question here. So Kelly, your September 9 story, report finds new solar projects, not grid operators, are paying for upgrades of transmission network. I'm going to do everything I can to resist a lengthy diatribe here, but I just want to make a point. When utilities have traditionally for the last 5-7 years gone after net metering programs, by my eyes, what they're essentially doing is saying, hey, pay us to not use our product, which is a pretty, I would like that deal. I just say as a business owner, I'd like NextEra to pay me to not hire us. So that would be a sweet gig. But the refrain from the utilities is always, all these solar homeowners are raising the cost, so they should pay their fair share. So here's the solar folks paying for grid upgrades, and the utilities are benefiting and they're not paying for it. So just saying. All right. Another question we got here.
And there's always,
oh, go ahead.
There's always been a matter of value of solar too. You know, that's a whole big thing, but
100%. We have a question from Israel. Gilad Guzman, he runs a early stage biomass company called Smart Bioenergy. Emailed me this morning, said it's very interesting to me to understand what the editors think about advanced biomass systems, which Gilad sells and will save a lot of money to the individual plants, biomass flexibility, et cetera. Just general thoughts on biomass right now. Anybody want to take a stab at that? It's a rush for the door here. All right, don't make me call on you. Yulia, biomass?
I mean, I was going to say that whenever we get pitches on deals of different of other smaller generation from the generator side, Utility Dive is mostly going to ask, oh, what utilities are you working with? Where are you playing? And we're also really only focused on US. I know lots of other countries have made a lot greater use of biomass as a resource. I think that it hasn't ended up being something that we see big push for with tax credits and stuff, although of course as a renewable resource they can, and I guess I'm going to say that the larger trend that I've been following with clean tech has been how it's decentralizing from set larger plants to more flexible formats. Not that that can't be done in different ways, like community sort of sharing ways with biomass.
Just get people's reaction to this. It seems like there's two there's a spectrum of views on biomass, and they're kind of bookended. One is, we'll call it the BNEF view. So Bloomberg New Energy Finance, basically, they did an analysis a while back written by Ken Lachlan, and he said essentially the sources that have the renewable energy sources that have already scaled, onshore, offshore, solar in its various permutations. It's all we really need. If you have storage and transmission, basically, we don't need to develop new energy sources. At the other end of the spectrum is, no, we need biomass because we have all sorts of point sources of biomass pollution, if you will, and biomass can address those. Chicken waste in the Chesapeake Bay, hog waste in eastern North Carolina, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the problem, of course, is that biomass has been the worst of the biomass is chop down trees in the southeastern US, grind up the trees, make them to pellets, ship them all over to Europe to burn them in pellet, which seems kind of stupid, but there's a lot of actual waste that could be burnt. Don't know if anybody has any views on where they think biomass emerges in the US market. Zach and Heather, you got any thoughts on this?
I'll make a brief comment. Like there are a lot of commercial and industrial organizations that are looking at it for point source solutions, as you say, in their manufacturing facility. They've got a big thermal issue that they've got to deal with, right? But most of them are leery of the, before I was talking about the accounting, like what's the real impact? And so that it's got such kind of like like using biomass is almost akin to greenwashing now for some of them. So they're kind of stepping back from it a little bit.
Yeah, I would.
Pardon me?
Sorry, I thought you were done.
No, go ahead, Zach.
I would echo what both of you said, and I'm glad Heather said it more strongly than I was going to try to say it. But I mean, I lived in Poland for 11 years, and there's a big fight in Poland, in Europe, in the EU about clean energy legislation, and a lot of it gets around that topic of biomass because of exactly what Heather just said, and Poland liking to use it in that way, and what you said as well, Mike, about chopping down trees in the southeast US and sending it over there to burn in repurposed power plants, basically. So I haven't seen anything really any exciting or uplifting news. I haven't really seen any real positive trends about it, and I agree just with what they both said about it sort of being iffy on evaluating it well, whether it's greenwashing or not, and but potentially maybe as Yulia was saying, small scale, more flexible applications, not such huge projects, but that could get some movement in that regard. But
they're struggling because I know at least one group was trying to make biomass fit into a bid as temporary generation last year for PG&E. So there's definitely biomass groups out there that are trying to be less traditional in what we might think of as biomass.
Darius?
Well, just to throw it into the mix, so to speak, Henrik Stiesdahl's Sky Clean technology, if you haven't looked into it, pretty fascinating. I mean, Henrik Stiesdahl is obviously one of the great geniuses of the renewables revolution, but they're in the process of building a pilot plant now on an island off Denmark, which will use agricultural waste, and it will burn it in an oxygenless pyrolysis process.
Biochar,
yeah, so it's effectively it's carbon negative in the end. It's part of his Sky Clean idea actually to develop a jet fuel that's equivalent to the A1 jet fuel that we use in airlines today. But the process, of course, because you're using agricultural waste as a starting point. It means that, you know, so the more fuel you burn, the more CO2 is removed from the air. So you know, this is obviously a fascinating concept, and it's at pilot scale now, and yeah, there's a lot of money, you know, obviously gathering at the gates to support this, and not least because of obviously the potential in the airline industry. You're unmuting again,
Heather, you had your hand up.
Yeah, just one quick add to what Darius was just saying. Yeah, biochar is absolutely very interesting to companies like Microsoft that are trying to figure out how to remove carbon. So we do see investments there. Different topic.
You know, along the lines of accountability, I would say Susan Monroe, who's a friend of ours, the Chambers for Innovation, she sent in this question this morning, which, Heather, I think this is totally up your alley. She said, we sometimes hear big dollar figures associated with clean energy project development, millions, billions dollars of investment, thousands of jobs. They're impressive figures to me as an economic development professional. However, what suggestions the editors have for us to better communicate or translate those numbers into more meaningful impact? Any thoughts, like as people who get lots of pitches from people like Susan, from myself, do you have any suggestions for us on how to make large, big, multi-year figures more accessible? Yulia?
More than, I mean, I mentioned before partnerships with utilities being utility dive, but also I think more important now than new projects is new grid roles. And if you can detail to me how are you playing, especially as the more we get renewables on the grid, the more we're going to end up seeing prices go up when we get to the very, very top percentage of renewables integration. So if there are projects that are thoughtful about that, that's really what we're trying to cover more. Because for our audience, it's less news that there are renewables being built, but we're looking at different procurement models and different roles they're trying to serve on the grid that are going to potentially be adapted or replicated.
Any of your thoughts on Susan's question?
I'm not 100% clear on whether this answers the question, but the thing that gets my attention is to the point about roles. Like, are you creating jobs that are going to people that have been displaced from fossil fuels industry jobs? Are you creating them in places that could really benefit from that? Are you creating them with individuals that that are not currently represented in the energy system? There's a great set of data out a few weeks ago, and I'm not going to try to cite the figures because they're not in front of me, but the abysmal showing of women and diverse individuals in the energy industry. If you show me that these are creating jobs for individuals and that this transition is going to help pull people in that haven't had an opportunity before, that's going to get my attention.
Great. I'm going to move to another audience question here. So we have a friend, Willie Brent. He's in my line of work over in Spain, and he asks, do you have any resources or interest to cover developments in Africa and developing Asia? A lot of innovations coming out of those regions, but most focus seems to be more on developed markets. What could change that for the editors?
Well, you know, I'll jump in just to say that, you know, Africa is obviously broadly potentially seen as underpinning the next wave in the renewables, you know, rollout globally. And if you look at some of the multi gigawatt scale projects, Mauritania, you know, just because I mentioned it earlier, but other parts of Africa, I mean, these are clearly going to be fundamental to you know, to relate to how the scale up takes place at a pace that it's going to get anywhere near what it needs to be in terms of clean energy build out. But how it actually gets our attention, you know, the hard reality, invariably, like anything in renewables, I find is it has to have you know, the developer names you know, of you know, that list of developer names has to be attached to it. You know, the conglomerates, the multinationals, or indeed, you know, the twiggy forests of this world who are stumping up their own, pardon the pun, you know, their own billions to get certain projects underway. But I think there's no doubt that, you know, as Africa goes, it's going to be at the center of a lot of what happens in the next 10, 20, 30 years in terms of new build clean energy development. As far as what happens in some of these, the sort of smaller Asian markets, I think that, dare I say, I think offshore wind is going to be a big part of that discussion, especially when you attach in floating and attach hydrogen to it, because they won't have, these countries don't have the land mass to do onshore wind or to do onshore solar in any meaningful way, and they want the industrial transformation. They want the economic development that comes with bringing a new industry like offshore wind into into the domestic dynamic, if you like.
All right, kind of a big thought question here. Just like to get everybody's responses. Within the next 5 to 10 years, will storing heat or storing electricity contribute more to renewable scaling? Storing heat or storing electricity? Zach, you're the biggest battery lover I know, so you're going to have to go first.
I like them both. I like to. It's hard to say which will be more a bigger deal in the next few years. I think obviously traditionally we've talked a lot more about storing electricity, and I think Darius or maybe it was some people already talked about that as being an important trend. I agree. I think that's going to be a really fun, big trend to follow. But storing heat has not really gotten the love that it's maybe we dreamt a decade ago it would be getting, and I think it's starting to sort of pick up as a good topic. So I'm curious to follow both. I don't know which would have a bigger impact. I mean, just pure numbers. I get pure storing electricity. I think will be very big in the next few years.
You can thank me afterward for not putting you on the spot by asking you whether Ford or Tesla is going to make the bigger impact, because I know you wouldn't really want to go there. But all right, Kelly, storing heat or storing electricity, which is going to be a bigger deal?
I mean, I think electricity, just that market is more developed, obviously, and especially in the United States. I just following along on Twitter, people are kind of starting to understand the value of heat pumps. And so if that's just kind of starting now, it's the United States is going to take a long time to kind of get to that point. So definitely electricity is going to be the way.
All right. Heather?
That is a really hard question. You're asking which will have the most impact, then I say electricity. Which should have the most impact, or I'd say heat. I mean, like that is where so many companies have not made a dent yet in their decarbonization. I mean, they have all these manufacturing processes that require that heat, and we really need to work on that. So like I would love to see it be focused on heat, but I think electricity, especially with all the disruptions to the grid that we've seen in so many places. I'll mention Louisiana, instead of California right now, but yeah. So I think electricity will have the most impact.
All right, David.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. Electricity. Although I will say that I know my colleagues who are working on the global issue of our magazine over in Europe are getting a lot of play around heat, and they're covering that as an increasing issue. It hasn't hit the radar to the extent here. But,
Okay, Darius, I know you're a wind guy, but we're gonna still put you on the spot.
I think it's horses for courses, as far as people tell me, and I will say, we're just troubadours riding alongside this particular industry, aren't we? I think obviously batteries have their place, and the alternative chemistries that are going to be this kind of middle ground between electricity and long duration storage are going to have their place too. But again, I would defer to those who study this area and report on this area more closely than I. But certainly I know that for what it's worth, we ran one of our digital roundtables on long duration energy storage, which was everything from liquefied air energy storage through to some of the thermal concepts that Siemens and Henry Stiesel and others are developing. And that was one of our best attended. I think we had 3,000 registrants for that. I mean, there's such an enormous appetite for an understanding of that storage. Those storage concepts really do give the week long, the weeks profiles rather than the hours profiles.
All right, Yulia, last word.
I think of when I'm looking at the forward stories or the deeper stories we look at, I think of the heating question as something that is still it's just so much more conceptual in the US. It's more, we'd be reporting on something that would be cutting edge to pilot or to model, whereas the discussions on energy storage, on electricity storage, has been a lot more about how can we scale up yesterday. So I guess just because of that, I'm not going to go with heat, but I am very curious about heat.
All right. We got 7 minutes left. Another thought question here. Will the renewables industry be able to solve its transmission challenge? And if so, how? Yulia?
It's not up to them, but they wish it was, I guess is my ultimate answer on that. Like, I think it's fascinating, but I mean, everyone agrees transmission is a big block, but it's just so it's hard to have renewables try to solve that for themselves. So I would say hopefully we're going to see a lot more coming from FERC, and a lot more coming from different wholesale markets on just like the competition to have transmission connect to them. And I guess here's hoping to them.
Yay,
Okay.
New York.
Yeah.
David, Kelly?
Well, I think the interesting thing about solar is that it certainly is scalable, and you can solve the transmission problem by putting solar on your rooftop and really have a local, very distributed solution to it. And I think that that as climate change challenges really hit home with the solar industry, both with perhaps increased vulnerability to fires in the West, to intense hailstorms that we've seen in certain parts of the country, with affecting large-scale solar arrays, and also the impact of hurricane force winds, those sorts of things. More distributed local microgrid solutions that use solar along with storage, it strikes me as solving some of those transmission issues.
Yeah, I've been talking to a lot of people out in the Northeast United States about virtual power plants. And it seems that obviously that's really picking up, especially Green Mountain Power. Obviously in Vermont, they're a very progressive utility. They are encouraging customers to adopt batteries, and then, then they have access to those batteries to kind of help with, loads and demand that. So that's really picking up in the Northeast, which is kind of, I don't know, surprising. It's great. New York's doing some of them too. Massachusetts, obviously, Connecticut's really big with it. So virtual power plants are becoming a much bigger thing. Like, utilities have always been kind of quick to dislike residential solar, but now it seems that they are actually pro residential storage. So it's starting, those situations are going to kind of solve a lot of those bigger transmission issues.
What do you say, Zach? Is transmission going to get solved?
Oh, I think everybody said great stuff already. I don't have anything more to add on that. I will just go back one step to the heating versus battery electricity storage thing, just to qualify that a little bit. I think as people said, we sort of have a machine running for battery storage, for electricity storage, and it's off to the races. And I feel like the heating storage topic is more like maybe if you'd ask someone about green and blue hydrogen 3 years ago and be like, what? Well, there's not much going on. And also, just there's like Heather pointed out, there's just so much, there's so much potential there that's not tapped. And I feel like there's a lot of people looking into it now. So I think it's just going to be a very fascinating thing to cover in the next few years. But obviously it's not a well-oiled machine that's running smoothly like the battery storage industry now.
Darius, last word on transmission, then I got we close with our round robin question here.
let me offer some circularity in saying hydrogen is the solution. Obviously, you produce as much as you like, you make it a commodity, you ship it around the planet, you use LNG shuttle tankers to do so. You can you green shipping in the process. Transmission ain't that big a deal then all of a sudden, in a sense, but of course within the United States, for instance, it is a fundamentally enormous issue. Within Europe, onshore, again, it is an enormous issue, and we can do all produce all the offshore wind power we care to, but if we can't get it on the grid, then what good is it? So but I do think this is where actually hydrogen makes one of the strongest cases around as a kind of storage medium, a commoditizable storage medium at that for electricity.
All right, closing 2 minutes. Who is your interview you most want, or the byline you most want to see and haven't seen yet, and why? So who do you want to interview, or who do you want to get a byline piece from? What would be the dream interview, dream byline, and why? Zach?
I need to think a little. I mean, have to think for a second.
Elon Musk.
Well, yeah, Elon would be great. You
get to think
obvious.
big here, right? It's just you get.
I'm trying to think of a less. Yeah, I mean that's an obvious one. We get every exclusive we can from him, and yeah, but
I have one.
Please.
Laureen Powell Jobs.
All right, good. We're going to put these up on LinkedIn and tag them. So, our little contribution to increasing the chance you can get the interview you want. Not that you need our help, but there you go. All right. And Heather, why do you? Yes, absolutely.
I just feel like well, first of all, she's got a lot of money and she's using it. And she's using it in places you wouldn't expect.
Okay. Julia?
Well, my feed has changed a little bit as far as the reporting I get to do, but I really, really love getting to pick the brains of people that go from the utility section to distributed resources. So I guess Mary Powell, who's now at the helm of Sunrun, I think that's a very interesting move.
David?
I'll have to say that really what I
David, I
like,
think you're on mute.
Oh.
There you go. Now we got
Am I
you.
there? Okay.
Yep.
What I like are elegant, simple solutions, folks who come up with those and then really drive them down to the underserved portions of the global population. That would be, just one quick example. I was doing some pro bono work a couple of years ago with a group called Engineers Without Borders. And one of their student chapters was working in Mexico on a clean water project. The problem was arsenic in the local water supply. And what the students came up with was a elegant, simple, sustainable local solution, which was to put rusty nails in a column of a sand column. They ran the water through that. The arsenic precipitated onto the rusty nails, and they solved that problem. That kind of stuff really interests me, because we can throw all kinds of money at all of these issues, but if we don't solve the problem really at the portions of the population globally that don't have access to clean water and clean and energy, electricity, all of those sorts of things, then we're not going to solve the problem. So rather than an individual, it's those folks who are coming up with those elegant solutions that really excite me.
Kelly?
Mine's kind of a jokey one, but I think the actor Mark Ruffalo would be really cool to talk to. He's very pro-solar. He's gone to, board meetings, utility board meetings, and spoke his mind. So I think just to have somebody with that much kind of standing, with so much passion for renewables, I think he'd be kind of a fun interview.
All right.
And he's like a big clean water activist and
Yeah.
water utility.
He's a good one.
I'm changing mine. I'm also Mark Ruffalo now.
I don't know.
And he's handsome and he takes pictures in the bathtub. This is like, come on.
He's a perfect human.
To be fair, I think Elon Musk would also do the bathrooms in the bathtub if you ask.
Oh, well, that's probably true.
Darius, you're going to impose some adult supervision on this conversation. You get the last word.
Yeah, Amanda Lefton, I think, director of BOE. She's taking a creaky old oil and gas organization and she's turning it upside down and turning it into something that's very, forward-looking and visionary. She has her work cut out for her, but she's accelerating things at a pace right now. And it's not just energy transition; it's industrial transformation, and it's a societal metamorphosis in the process. So I think she's quite in quite a fascinating role. And I've heard her speak. She believes in floating wind off the East Coast, and there aren't many people who believe in that. So I'm all for Amanda Lefton.
Good.
I came up with my answer. It's Joe Biden. Yeah, or like that would be the best.
Final word.
Well, Zach, I was going to close this out by making an offer, but you kind of wrecked it. But here we go. So we'll post that we did this. We're at a close here. And if you just do a share and tag your dream interview, we'll see if we can make sure that gets amplified to said handlers or said person. So we can't help you out with Biden, I'm afraid.
Just do it, Mike. No try. Just do it. We want Biden.
All right, Yoda. I'll give it a whirl. All right. Hey, editors, thank you. This is so much. I just want to like the highlights of our quarter. We're going to try to bring you back for the end of the year. Want to thank all the folks who sent questions in advance and put questions on the panel up on the chat pane. They're better than ones I came up with. And it's so much fun to hear from you. And I know that my colleagues in the industry who watch your work, this is something that they pay a lot of attention to. So they get a lot of value out of it. I just want to thank you for the time. So with that, we will convene you again in before the end of the year, if you're up for that. And it's been a lot of fun. So thank you so much for joining us.
Great.
Thanks.
Take care. Bye now.
Well.